Hello friends, welcome back to the show. Today we're joined by Jon Augustine, a communication expert with nearly 3 decades of experience in public speaking, technical sales, and business leadership. In this episode, you're going to learn how to communicate more effectively in any setting, the importance of authenticity in all communication, tips for adapting your communication style to different audiences, the role of storytelling in making your message more impactful. This conversation is packed with anecdotal insights. Let's dive in. This episode is brought to you by Korchmar. If you're looking for handcrafted leather goods that combine timeless style with unmatched quality, look no further than Korchmar. With over 100 years of craftsmanship, they're a 4th-generation company. They offer a range of business bags, travel gear, accessories, all proudly made in the United States. Whether you need a classic briefcase or maybe a weekender bag for your next trip, Korchmar has you covered. I personally have the Lewis backpack, which I absolutely love. It's in espresso. It's like a dark brown. It's breaking in quite nicely. Elevate your style with leather goods built to last. Visit Korchmar.com, Korchmar.com today. Enter SH10 at checkout. You'll get 10% off your order. Again, Korchmar.com. Jon has led trainings for leading companies including AT&T, Charles Schwab, Fidelity, Levi Strauss, Oracle, State Street, the State of California, Visa, and Workday. Jon lives in LA or Los Angeles when he's not working, and he spends most of his time with one of his 3 adult children surfing, working on music, or reading in one of too many coffee shops in his hometown. Jon Augustine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Stephan. Good to be here. Good to see you, man.
And we were just talking, and you were actually like, this is not completely up to date. So I know that I had talked to you. You were at YouTube, which I guess is Google. But tell us some of the others that you've been able to work with recently.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago up there at YouTube and Google, some folks from Amazon recently. CrowdStrike, a company that's been in the news a lot lately, been a client of ours that we worked with. So yeah, and Capital Group, some others, a lot of individuals as well from those companies. Yeah.
That's awesome. So how did you get into this line of work?
I stumbled into it, and this work has just kind of chased me everywhere that I've gone. My first job out of college was in a radio advertising sales company while I was waiting to go into ministry work. I was looking to be a campus minister. That was what I had a passion for once I graduated from college. But there were no opportunities for me, so I just got into sales, and then not many months later, got an opportunity and spent about 10 years working as a public speaker and volunteer coordinator for a faith-based organization. And in that time, I was given a lot of direction on communication. I had a mentor who would sit on the front row anytime I was talking publicly. And he had a yellow pad of paper, and I always knew that there were 2 columns on that pad of paper. There was the left side that said excellent, and the right that said needs improvement. And he would be writing down all the time while I'm talking, and I knew that within minutes of me finishing whatever I was finishing, I was going to get some feedback from him. And he had this ongoing principle of trying to really fill that excellent side and encourage, say, here's what's working, here's what's good, and got very specific and granular on things that I could get better at. And I went for years. And I made a move into getting the sales and technical sales, and made a big move with my family to Northern California. But this kind of went with me everywhere. So even though I was making a living in sales and project management and the supply chain industry, I was always the one that was scrutinizing how we were holding our meetings, that was kind of editing copy for emails that we were sending out, and questioning why we were doing things a certain way, or why aren't we spending more time crafting how we want to say this or how we want to approach clients. So I was just always obsessed with words and coming across the right way and actually saying what we're trying to say. And it was just a couple years ago where I had written down on a piece of paper what my perfect job description was. And it was because I was in a startup. I had joined a startup in the world that I was in. And it was challenging. It started right at the beginning of the pandemic, and none of us could have predicted the difficulty that we were under. It was a well-financed company, but really, really challenging. And when I got to a point where I knew I didn't want to keep doing that for a living, but I wanted to do this kind of work. And I had written down on a piece of paper, here's what a good job description for me would look like. And it was just a random scribbling of thoughts. And it was about helping people speak, preparing people to get up in front of people and talk, or helping musicians prepare for auditions. That was another thing on the sheet. And I tucked it away and forgot about it. And then months and months and months go by, and I had reached a point of incredible frustration with the work I was doing. Incredible. And I was just going through pieces of paper from my desk, and I saw that job description, and it was like me talking to me, going, this is what you want, Augustine. And I literally Googled communications consulting San Francisco, because I was in Northern California at the time, and Decker popped up, and I just approached them. I connected with them through LinkedIn, and I spoke to one of them, and I said, I think I'm supposed to work for you. And then it just, many, many meetings later, I started officially doing this work, full time.
Did you actually say, I think I'm supposed to work for you?
In so many words. I didn't come out right away like that. I made an introduction. I think they thought I was coming to them like a potential client, like I wanted coaching, or I wanted someone from my company to coach. But within seconds of me meeting, his name is Mike, meeting Mike, I just said what I told you at the beginning. This work has been chasing me everywhere I go. And it just so happened at the time, too, that they were looking for someone that didn't just have a 100% communications coaching background. They wanted someone with business experience. And so I had a couple decades in one industry selling and managing teams and managing projects. And so they felt that was a really important element to be bringing to this game, because I'm going out and talking to companies and really, really, really intimately familiar with the plights that they're under as sales organizations or as organizations trying to grow with multi-tiers. So the timing was just right. It was definitely one of those things where I thought, I didn't make this happen. I just kind of rode a wave of intention, and the opportunity opened up.
Do you still have that list in your head? Because you're teaching people to communicate. Mm-hmm. And when you're teaching them, and we're going to dive into that because I want to get into the nitty gritty of what that looks like. But do you still have that, that legal pad or whatever in your head saying, oh, you could have said that better to this day?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when I'm like right now, if I'm talking to you and you're just a friend and we're doing a podcast, I'm not sitting here scrutinizing everything you say. But absolutely, I'm obsessed with refining and sharpening, because we are bombarded, we're assaulted by words and data and ideas every day. And I know that it's really difficult to even find what it is you're trying to say quite often, even just really by yourself knowing what is it that I'm actually after here, and then to translate that into words that matter. It's a lifelong obsession, and I find it fun. When Amanda Gorman gave the speech at Joe Biden's inauguration, she was the poet laureate, Lin-Manuel Miranda tweeted something at her. I think that's how it went down, but it's one of my favorite quotes. He said to her, the right words in the right order can change the world. And I just love that idea, because so many ideas, so many concepts got traction because someone said it right. They found it. They found that sweet spot. And so, yeah, it's with me all the time. It's always with me.
That's cool. And for those listening, John and I actually go back quite a ways. We've been good friends for, over a decade.
Yeah, easily. 2014 or prior.
Yeah. And so I've always looked up to you as someone that not only was great in business, and I remember, being younger and calling you with business ideas, and you'd always challenge me. And now, fast forwarding to where you're at in communication, even with my podcast now, I've talked to you multiple times about how do I get better at doing this podcast thing? And your insight and feedback has been very helpful. So I just wanted to let you know that, and thank you for that.
Yeah.
So we all want to be better at communicating. Mm-hmm. And would you say that right now, as a people, as a human race, that we're at an all-time low in our ability to communicate, like the worst we've ever been?
The worst we've ever been.
Yeah, because we're on our phones. We text now. We have ChatGPT to write things for us.
Yeah.
People don't like talking on the phone,
Yeah.
etc.
It's difficult for me to say if we're better or worse. I will tell you, we are different. We're different. The means by which we communicate have never been greater. There are different means. Think about how you and I set this up. There's a text. Here's what we're going to do it. Oh, here's an email. Send me information. Let me email you this. We had phone calls. Like that's 3 vehicles of communication between 2 old friends, and we could have been using Slack or WhatsApp. Like there's more ways to communicate, and so efficiency is at an all-time high as far as access to communication and ability and tools that are available. But what I'm seeing change is a difficulty in establishing context. This is a really fascinating thing to me because there's an entire generation of people who have learned to join conversations that are already happening online. So if you think of social media, pull your phone out and something comes to you and you comment on that. Or there's a group text and people say something and you kind of ride this flow. And it subverts, it kind of bypasses that need to connect and to establish some sort of context or reason or humanity. And we probably communicate, forget probably, we exchange information better than we ever have. But communication in its pure human form is definitely changing and is potentially on the downside, from what I'm seeing.
Yeah. So what are you seeing when you go into these companies, and why generally do they have you come in to help them?
There are a lot of different reasons, because I'll run classes with groups of people. A company will send, for instance, just a couple weeks ago, I was in Salt Lake City with a financial institution, and they sent 12 people that were all like just below the executives. Like this is the next group of leaders, and they're all already very effective communicators. That's how they got to where they are. And as you know, I mean, we know each other from music and other things, and there's a lot of similarities that I run parallel with communication and music. And it's kind of like taking a musician who's already really good at their instrument. Like, hey, you already know how to play. That's great. I don't have to talk about that's the wrong chord, that's the wrong note. But what I do get to talk about is phrasing and dynamics and tone and collaboration and listening. And so what often I find myself doing, and if I've got a group of people, is I've got a mix of experiences and ages and capabilities. And we get really specific in refining, first of all, just how they're coming across. Let's talk about you as the messenger. Like what does your face look like, your voice? Are you doing things that you're unaware of that might be neutral, or they might be actually taking away from your message, and we get into behaviors and those kind of things. But the real fun work, although that is fun, is we dive into content a lot and say, let's talk about a meeting that you have coming up. Let's talk about something like a podcast or something that you're nervous about, something that's a high stakes thing. How are you going to prepare for this? How do you normally prepare for this? And then that's where we get into real specific methodology on, first of all, thinking about your listener and really, really diving into who are you talking to and what is it they need? What is it they want? What kind of experiences did they have with someone like you in the past? And that's where I start to become kind of like a therapist. And that's what I love about this work. Right before this time, my last appointment of the day was with a new client, and she's a little younger, meaning just out of graduate school and was hired by a consultancy firm. And they're investing in her because they see leadership capability in her, and they thought she really could use some help in her communication. And the whole hour was pretty much a therapy session about her not being convinced that she belongs in the room. And I'm sharing this because a lot of what she was signaling externally, which was hands moving and flailing about and moving a lot and nervous laughter and very, very fast pace of talking, all that was indicative of something that was happening on the inside, which was nerves, fear, anxiety, adrenaline. And what we got to the root was, you really don't feel like you belong there, do you? And so then it was like a therapy session, and I loved it. It was great. You and I have had those kind of talks, right?
Yeah, we have. And imposter syndrome is something that I think so many people deal with.
Yeah. I see it at every level.
Is that one of the common... Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So, like, we name all these companies off at the beginning.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, wow, man. Like, you get to work with some amazing companies, Fortune 500s, you know? And then it's like, what is the common denominator that you find amongst these different companies?
There's a lot of imposter syndrome. Most people who don't have that at all are either remarkably Buddhistically confident, like, or they're sociopathic and unaware. Like, but the majority of folks, especially driven, ambitious, successful folks, have this nonstop sort of nagging in their ear or on their shoulder of, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough. And when it comes to specifically the work that I do, it's mostly public speaking, meaning there's really no such thing as private speaking. Anytime you're talking to another person, it's not public speaking. But obviously there's some situations that there's more at stake, there's a lot of people looking at you, or you've got a big meeting of consequence. My entire point being, imposter syndrome is magnified in public speaking because it's you. It's not an instrument separate from you. It's not engineering where there's a formula. There's not digging a ditch. Look, I dug a hole. There's the hole. There's the witness to my work. It's your entire self being judged. And so adrenaline, anxiety, fear, it happens to everybody at every level. And the higher up that I go with my clients, the more strategic and surgical I have to be with them, because I often start with them by commenting that obviously you got here because you're good. There's no reason you would have gotten here without being good. But everybody needs to be refined to some degree. And at some point, you reached an elevation in your company where people stopped telling you the truth. At some point, especially when it comes to how you're coming across, because their job's at stake, or you're so good they're kind of in awe, or they just want to keep that separation. So one of my jobs today is to break that cycle and actually tell you the truth. And they usually just melt at that point in a good way. Like, yeah, they feel relief. Like, yes, someone's finally going to be honest with me, you know, and it's one of my favorite things. Yeah.
So on just like paring this down even more to go macro, can you give me an example of what that might look like?
Yes. I'm trying to have a really good one for you. Here's a really simple one. Is a cardiologist, and he had been hired by a certain pharma company to teach other cardiologists about a drug that they're selling. And this is a really good, like, heart medication for people like my father who, you know, had a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Like, they're selling this drug, and this guy, esteemed Harvard grad, respected, he just confessed to me, he goes, I can't stop moving so damn much when I'm talking. How do I work on this? Like, in other words, he had energy flowing through his body. He was shaking his leg. And we just started talking about, you got to do one mental thing. You got to do one physical thing. You got to make it about them. Here's something you could do physically with your body that can send that energy somewhere else. But that's a tiny, tiny little example of someone who was esteemed by his colleagues and very successful. But once someone showed up and gave him the freedom to talk about what he was really afraid of, he's like, yeah, I just hate how much I move my body around when I'm talking. Like, yeah, I understand that.
Okay, so let's take that principle and let's apply that to a dating relationship. let's say there's a guy, he's super nervous, he's terrible at communicating, and he sees a pretty girl, but he is the same way as this cardiologist.
Yeah.
Because these principles can be applied anywhere along the road of life.
Yeah, they can. This is, wow, a personal situation like that would be difficult to just give a formula. I would say this. I would say, don't underestimate the importance of authenticity and humor. And if you're nervous to talk to a girl, just own it. Just be like, that can be your line or your entry into it. Like, I'm exceedingly nervous to talk to you. Can you see how much my leg is shaking right now? I don't even know where to begin. But the truth is, I just really wanted to open up a conversation. How am I doing so far? Like just some humor maybe. And we do talk about, that's one of the elements of being a memorable communicator that we talk to our clients about, which is having a sense of humor about yourself, because stuff always goes wrong. And if you take everything too serious, you're setting yourself up for that bad cycle of nerves and anxiety and adrenaline and tightness and speed that is the death of really good communication.
Yeah. I remember taking a theater class in school, and they would talk about, I guess it was in Roman times, there was a kind of theater where you would address the audience, and there was a kind where you would pretend that they weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I love personally when someone's communicating is if they do make a flub or a mistake and they address the crowd, and it's almost a bit of a, like we can all breathe. It's a bit of an icebreaker.
Very much.
When you talk to this cardiologist, just to kind of stay in that idea with the nervousness and all of that, you said something important. Think about who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
When you say that, what do you mean?
A couple things. First of all, if there are two different elements to this that are critical. If you're really preparing, meaning I've got a message and I'm going to talk to a group of people. I have a meeting, I have a one-on-one, and you can sit there and think about it before it happens, which is a little bit different than what this cardiologist was asking, but I think it still answers your question, is preparing for a message, preparing for a situation where you're going to communicate. Take some time to really put yourself in the mindset of your listener. What are they going through right now as it relates to your topic? So if you're talking about, if it is a pharmaceutical drug and you're going to be speaking to another doctor, what's on their mind right now? It's probably not what's on your mind. And this is a big step forward when people start to learn to think about their listener first, because you are spending time with your idea, you're spending time with your data and the facts and some of the images you have in your head and why people should think the way you do or do what it is you want them to do or buy into what it is you're trying to put out there. But they aren't spending that same time with it. They're spending time with their ideas and their thoughts and their world. They're measured by something. Success looks like something to them. And usually what our idea and their success don't match right away. You know, if you're say you're a salesperson, you want them to use your product or service, but they're already using a product or service for a reason. So you are by definition interrupting their life. You're interrupting their flow. Unless they came to you and said, I need a XYZ, you're showing up with a whole new thing. So when you spend some time and you think, okay, this person is in operations. What are they into? They're into efficiency. They're into making the best use of their workers possible. They're into safety. They're into return on investment and not spending too much money. So I better make sure that from the very beginning, whatever I'm talking about addresses some of those things first. Even if it's not a direct hit to what I'm going to say eventually. Because it signals, I get it. I know your world a little bit. And so that's what I mean about the listener focus when you're preparing. With a cardiologist situation, when there's just pure nerves, it's somehow get the focus off of yourself and your mind. You are in that room to serve those people. And though you think you're being judged and you feel you're being judged and you got all this anxiety and the fear and adrenaline, as long as you have control over your thoughts to a degree, flip them and say, this is not about me, this is about them. I'm trying to be of service to them. So maybe that'll help my adrenaline go down just a little bit. So I always tell people who struggle with nerves, and if it's signaling in their body, there's something moving or shaking, whatever, to do two things. Do something mental, like I just said. Make a decision that it's about them, to be of service. And then do something physical, whether it's a box breathing exercise beforehand, or find a way to use your body in the moment that doesn't signal shaky, nervous. Look at people and maybe take a step towards them. Getting too granular now, but
I like granular.
Good.
I like granular. In terms of preparation, this is something that I've heard some say you should be so prepared for something that you can get up and do it without having to think about it. but we're not all afforded that luxury time-wise.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking with someone and they don't have the time to prep versus the person that, let's use a musical analogy, the band The Eagles, they've played the songs a million times. They can get on stage. They can go through the set. They're not nervous. They've done it. They know it inside and out, backwards, forwards. But you have the speaker that doesn't have that.
Yeah.
What does good preparation look like?
First, it's practicing certain behaviors for those moments. You have to prepare. I love the image. I believe it was John Wooden. I tend towards John Wooden as a basketball coach, someone who's very quotable. And UCLA basketball coach, there's books written about the way he trained men, not just players. I think it was him. He said you have to practice shooting free throws when you're tired. A lot of guys are practicing free throws when they're not winded, because that's a real world game simulation. You know, you just got fouled and your heart's racing and you're tired and it's the third or fourth quarter. How are your legs in that situation? So similarly, you got to have one or two things that you sit on when you're asked to wing it. Like, hey, we need to talk about this in 30 seconds. Oh, okay. In that case, it's quite often something as simple as slowing down. Slow down, and practice speaking slowly. Practice pausing, because otherwise you could get on that snowball of energy and ums and no's and likes, and pretty soon all you're doing is just scrambling. So the good preparation looks like actually talking out loud by yourself and videoing yourself when you can, and practicing certain behaviors for those moments when you're going to feel that adrenaline. What are you going to lean into? And for me, it's quite often speak slower and say fewer words. Practice speaking slower, practice saying less. Because
speak slower, say fewer words.
Yeah. Because what happens is when you get thrust into a situation where you have to suddenly talk, we feel, again, that pressure, and our limbic system kicks in. And the limbic system was developed in the human history when it was cave living and fields and big beasts that were out to harm you. And so our brain triggers speed, get out, move, heart rate up, breathing quickly, sweat. All of that is not helpful for communicating. So it's helpful when a saber-toothed tiger is bearing down on you, but it's not when you're sitting and you've got 30 seconds to say an idea in front of 6 of your peers or some directors of your company. So it's weird how the body works against itself in that situation. The brain is saying, get out, get out, get out. But you actually need to slow down. You need to breathe more slowly. You need to speak slower and try to say less. Instead of saying, man, I only have 3 minutes, I'm going to say as much as I can in 3 minutes. People can't take in a lot. So actually try to say less. Try to come up with one really good thing to say. You don't have to say 6 good things in 6 minutes. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from with that.
Yeah, let's talk about the limbic system a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I think about this a lot. We live at a time where I was actually having a conversation with someone that's a human biomechanics specialist over the weekend. And they do a certain form of exercise where they essentially, and they approach health and fitness like they eat seasonally, get a lot of sunlight, they go barefoot and get the earth underneath them. And they talk about, we were made to be outside. We were made for sunshine. We were made to work out in a way where we're picking up things. How often in caveman days were we bench pressing?
Right.
Versus, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was interesting having this conversation about the human anatomy and psychology is not really caught up to where we are technologically. And we experience that, and I myself can speak on my behalf, that limbic system just going into full tilt saying you're going to die. And it's not necessarily that I believe it, but it's our physical reaction.
Yeah.
One of the best things you ever told me was hey, you're going to be nervous. You're going to have anxiety. So you have to come to terms with the fact that you are going to feel a certain way.
Yeah.
Why did you tell me that?
Well, we were talking about preparing for some podcasts that you had coming up of Consequence, if I remember.
Yeah.
And you and I both shared one another's imposter syndrome about whatever. We're both musicians too. Musicians are rife with imposter syndrome. And it's also one of the reasons why when I wrote down my dream job description, I was also thinking of musicians and helping them to prepare for auditions, because it's a similar plight that you were going through, that I've gone through, that I watched my kids go through. And then I try to help other kids too who are getting ready for college auditions who are musicians. And that is this, that look, when you are nervous, that is not an ethereal, cloudy thing happening in the sky. That is a physiological thing happening in your body. It is chemistry. The brain tells the adrenal gland, send adrenaline through the system, send speed, meth through your blood, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think there's ever going to come a time that you're going to be so good that you don't feel those things, you're wrong. The wise thing to do is to not wait to not feel those things. The wise thing to do is accept you're going to feel those things. You're going to be nervous. You will not stop adrenaline from pumping through your veins. So I'm not interested in you becoming not afraid anymore. I'm interested in what happens when you are afraid and how are you going to manage that. That's why you and I talked about it. Yeah. And I'll tell you this. I may have told you this, but I tell my clients this all the time. I just told someone this today. I said, look, you should be afraid because there are consequences to doing a bad job. You've got a podcast. You want to do a good job. There are ways to mess it up. And similarly, when we communicate, especially in a high stakes situation, even though we were joking earlier about this girl that someone might be interested in, that's high stakes, man. Your emotions are involved. That could be the love of your life. Like, there's a lot at stake. Or you're a professional and you're going to report to the board of directors. That's high stakes. Your brain is doing its job telling you to be afraid. Now let's accept that. How does that manifest in you? Well, some people, fear means talking. I just talk really fast. Some people, it's sweating. Some people, they freeze. But you and I both know, especially as musicians, tightness kills. It kills playing guitar, it kills singing, it kills playing piano, it kills communication because it removes you from being awake and aware and flexible. And a lot of good communication is being super flexible and aware and staying in tune with what's happening in the room. You got to sort of dance with it. So in a way, you have to also kind of dance with your adrenaline. Like, oh, there it is. There's that feeling. You know what I do with that? I reframe it as that's energy that is telling me I have a great opportunity to help these people. That's energy saying, man, you worked really hard to get to this point. Like but you got to start with embracing it and stop asking, how can I not be so afraid? Oh, you're just going to be afraid. It's just going to happen. I'm curious to you because you bring that point up. I just talked a lot. I'm like, what did you take away from that conversation when we were talking about adrenaline?
It was just the reassurance that it's okay to feel how I feel, because no one had ever told me that. I've always avoided that feeling.
Yeah.
And when you push off a feeling, when you feel it, it just makes you more anxious.
Yeah.
So for you to say, hey, you're gonna have anxiety, it is a big guest. You will be nervous. Oh. So it's okay then. It is, just like you said, the reframe, but it was an entire paradigm shift psychologically just because of how you reframed that it's okay to feel that way. And sometimes I think we just need someone to tell us, hey, it's going to be all right.
Yeah.
How much of that do you do in your line of work?
A fair amount. It's the number one question I get asked by clients in groups or individuals. How do I deal with fear? How do I deal with adrenaline? And a lot of it is the answers that we just told you. Do something, retrain your brain, do something mental, do something physical. But it's such a multi-layered question because when does it happen? How does it happen? What does it look like for you? Are there certain situations where you feel more adrenaline and fear than others? For me individually, I was trained as a performer from a pretty young age, and so I'm very comfortable in the spotlight. It's a very weird thing. I feel okay when there are a lot of eyes on me. I feel less comfortable in smaller situations. That's me. Like if I'm in a room full of 5 to 6 people, all eyes on me, and I know them, that gives me more anxiety. And I know there are plenty of people who are the exact opposite. They're like, give me a small room all day, 100 people, lights on me, I'm gonna freeze. And so in between those two extremes are a lot of people. And so I'm always looking for, like, for instance, if someone's really high up as a leader in their company, there's still people they're afraid of. There's still situations that really bother them, and it's not always someone with more power than them. Sometimes they're very intimidated by the forklift driver who's been there for 28 years. Because there's a sense that they can't connect with them for whatever reason. But it's a universal truth. It's everybody deals with it. Everybody deals with it.
Yeah. Let's go into so you studied at UCLA. Your degree is in music, correct?
It is.
And you were raised, your dad was an amazing pianist. And can you talk about that a little bit, his impact on you musically?
Yeah.
And kind of that progression, because many of you that are listening probably, well, maybe you are, but the show that you were on, Jon, was called Star Search?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And it was hosted by Ed McMahon?
That's right, Ed McMahon.
Okay. So, like, Jon's generation of American Idol or The Voice was Star Search. And
That's
you
right.
were on it when you were how old?
I was 19.
19.
Mm-hmm.
So leading up to that, can you kind of walk me through that upbringing musically?
Yeah, my dad was a jazz pianist and eventually became a piano teacher. He grew up on the East Coast, and his older brother George, my uncle, was a jazz trombonist. And he moved to Los Angeles in 1967. My uncle did, and that was a time when Latin jazz was really flourishing in Los Angeles. And my dad was trying to make it he started as a saxophone player, then he moved to piano, and he was the father of my older sister who had been born in New York. And then they were pregnant with me and decided to follow my Uncle George in 1971. My mom was pregnant with me, and they moved to Los Angeles. And I remember growing up with this little apartment on 28th Street and a Fender Rhodes 73. It's this digital piano, like an electric piano with a super cool sound that's very 1970s. And I remember some of my earliest memories were just coming out into the living room. This is an apartment, it was small, but I would see my dad. My dad was a big guy, he's 6 foot and like big bone, burly guy, really thick fingers. My friends would always say, I'd never forget meeting your dad and shaking his hand for the first time, because my hand just disappeared. He should have been a bricklayer or something. But he's a pianist, man. He's playing piano, and there would be a bass player and a drummer. And he was mostly playing jazz, but he was playing some other, like Steely Dan, stuff that was big in the mid 70s. And he struggled. It's hard to make a living as a musician. So he delivered Sparkletts water bottles. He tried to get into sales back when pianos and organs were being sold. And he sold for Sherman Clay piano at the Santa Monica Place when I was 12 years old. And that's when he discovered he was a really good piano teacher and a terrible salesman. So he found in his late 30s, early 40s, his calling, because they would sell a piano or an organ. This was before home keyboards existed. People were buying organs. And his manager, Merrill, created this deal. It was in the Santa Monica Place, the mall, where anytime someone bought a new organ or piano, they would get like 2 or 3 free lessons. And my dad became the teacher, and pretty soon that became his full-time job. So my mom was an educator, my dad was an educator, my sister's a teacher. There's teaching in our blood. And music became the bridge that bonded my dad and I, because, that fathers and sons don't always have the easiest time connecting and talking at an emotional level. But when you have music, there's suddenly this natural ordering of the relationship where you have the master and the student, you have the older guy and the younger guy. And my dad and I started to enjoy that relationship when I started playing music as a kid. And he became, still to this day, he passed a couple years ago, but he's absolutely the greatest musical influence on my life, no doubt. No doubt.
Was he the one? That's beautiful. Was he the one that you looked to for approval more than anyone? Like that one person that you wanted to say, "Good job, Jon. That sounded good." Was he full of compliments, or did he kind of hold back on that end?
My dad was effusively complimentary. Like, he complimented everyone. It's one of the reasons why he was such a good teacher. And I can't answer that question with an emphatic yes, because I never became a jazz musician. And when I would attempt to play jazz, I played bass a little bit, and I would play with him, and he would appropriately dial down his expectations when I was playing with him, and he would turn it into a good time. I got a little bit more interested, as you know, in jazz as I got older, and I got a little bit more deep into it. But by then I was an adult, and I was approaching him with questions. But one of the strengths about my dad's teaching style, and I think I inherit this too, is that he made everybody believe they can do this. And that's very different for jazz. There's a lot of people in high art forms that require so much discipline that when they've made it, they kind of make everyone feel like, you'll never be able to do this. This is so hard. And my dad built a thriving piano teaching studio he just taught one-on-one, because people would come to him after feeling super insecure, having another teacher be really hard on them or make them all this complicated lesson plans. And my dad would come like, "No, here, I'll show you how to do it." And he would show them tricks, and he would make them feel like they can do it. And one particular guy, this guy, Gary Lamel, who was a really, really high up in Warner Brothers Entertainment. This is Los Angeles. My dad's getting a lot of referrals. And he would have famous people come in his studio all the time that he had no idea. This is a bit of a diversion, but maybe you'll enjoy it, because this is a long form discussion. You and I are.
Yeah, go there.
My sister was going with one of my nephews. Like, both nephews were taking piano lessons from my dad. And it's this tiny little dingy studio on Santa Monica Boulevard and 14th Street. And it had kind of a waiting room, but it was connected to his room. And in the waiting room, you could play a keyboard with headphones in. So that was kind of like you'd wait for your next lesson while the other lesson's going on. My sister's there, and there's a new time slot. And she hears that the lesson ends, so she stands up with her son to take him to my dad. Little kid walks out, and behind him is The Edge from U2. And my sister just watches The Edge, the guitarist, go. And he leaves, and she goes, "Dad, do you know who that was?" He goes, "Yeah, he's a guitarist. He plays in some rock band somewhere." It was The Edge. And this kind of happened, like, he taught George Brown, the original drummer from Kool and the Gang, because he wanted to make a transition from being a drummer to a pianist. I'm sharing all this to say that Gary Lamel, this guy from Warner Brothers, who was very, very successful as an executive at Warner Brothers, but always wanted to be like a Frank Sinatra singer and to be able to play jazz piano and accompany himself. And he shared at my dad's retirement party that when he left from his first lesson with my dad, he was in his 60s by the time he found my dad as a teacher. He said, "I got in my car, I called my wife, and I said, I just found God." And then he wasn't saying my dad was God, but he was saying that he opened up a way of seeing music that made him feel like it was possible for him. And I'm so glad you brought up this line of thinking, because I do feel that I carry that with me in how I coach people, because whether it's the recent grad student like I had today or the very, very high up executive in a really, really globally renowned company, they all want to feel like they can do it, and I know that there's just so much in there that's telling them why they can't or how they can't. And I find it's better to be an encouraging coach. Yes, we're going to point out what needs to be worked on. We're going to get very specific about it, but overall, you can do this. People need that encouragement. And I got that.
And you're carrying the baton of education.
Feels like it.
That's beautiful.
Thanks, man.
How do you integrate, because I know we've talked about this and it would be cool to share, how do you integrate music into your teaching?
I have to stop myself sometimes because I do it too much. But one very specific way is people's voices. I often record people. I say, okay, I want you to listen to yourself talk. And what do you notice? what I'm trying to lead people to is that we all have ways we use our voices that we fall into, and we fall into traps sometimes where everything sounds the same. It's just we don't pay attention to it. And part of being an effective communicator is keeping people interested. And I love talking about the voice as an instrument. You've got to have some variation. You've got to have some dynamics. You have an instrument here, and you're saying everything the same way. Let's think about some of your favorite music. There's loud parts. There's really quiet parts. There's high pitch. There's low pitch. There's pauses. There's phrasing. Like if I said, hey, Stephan, man, you did a really good job. I'm super proud of you. That's one thing. If I said, Stephan, you did a really good job. I'm super proud of you. Total different effects, right? And that's one way of treating communication like music. Phrasing, rhythm, pitch, volume, space, rests. I talk about this stuff all the time.
It's a dance.
It is.
Communication is much like music, because what are we ultimately doing in music anyway?
Communicating, expressing.
Yeah, just in a different art form.
And along those lines too, you and I know we've talked about before, some of our favorite musicians are people who can play fast if they wanted to. Take a John Mayer guitarist. You know he could shred, right? Mm-hmm. But the fact that he chooses not to all the time, because that's what's more important, that feel, that emotion is what you're trying to do. And that's what I look for in communicators. When people are in a high stakes environment when they're communicating, I really want them to tap into that feel part of their message. And I want them to express it in a way where when it's coming out of their mouth, they're like, yes, that's what I mean. That's where word choice, when you spend time coming up with a phrase that really feels good coming out of your mouth, like it's the same thing as like a really incredible riff by a guitarist, or just an amazing chord change, or it's the same thing. It's the same feeling.
When it comes to you making this career transition, I think it's inspiring, because when we're young, we feel like we have to have everything figured out. And you made a career change and bet on yourself later in life than a lot of people do. You know, you could have stayed in what you did, but instead you took a chance. Do you feel like, just as a culture, as people, we feel that we have to have our, like, this is what I'm gonna do, this is my purpose, nailed down at a young age? Because I had a conversation recently with like you, or like your dad and you, but I taught guitar lessons for a lot of years, and I've had conversations with kids that are graduating high school and thinking about what to do next, you know? Mm-hmm. What do I do? I gotta figure out what my life's gonna be. And I'm like, bro, you're 18, chill, it's all gonna be all right, you know? Yeah. But you making this change, and me stumbling into podcasting, I'm almost 36, and it's a culmination of everything I've learned in the music world, where I'm having conversations with people, but I'm not playing an instrument right now. I'm talking, and I love to talk. Mm-hmm. And then you have this culmination of, okay, I did public speaking in a religious organization. Mm-hmm. I got into sales. I put in all these reps, probably on the phone, probably made cold calls, probably went door to door.
Yes and yes and yes. Mm-hmm.
And then you had to be the guy that even said, like, okay, what is the intention of this meeting? You were a facilitator. And then all of a sudden, you write down, what is the perfect job? And here you find yourself making this transition at this point in your life. When you look back on all of that, do you feel like it's led to this moment?
Yes, emphatically yes. And thank you for the affirmation too. I mean, I'm 52 years old. I'll be 53 tomorrow. I made the big change when I was 50. And I never sat in a room and, just planted myself and said, I'm going to make a career change and I'm going to be proud of myself. I followed my feelings. I know that sounds very maybe cliche or woo-woo, but I was led by, first of all, I just knew I couldn't do another 2 decades of what I had done. And I didn't look back in the sales and regret it because it served me and my family so well. And the lessons that I learned through those years absolutely inform what I do now. But it was this collection of everything. My dad, my upbringing, my mom being an English teacher and really instilling love of language in us, my experience doing ministry, all the things, the musician, all those things came together. And one of the biggest gifts that this has given me, because it was a big financial risk, and it taught me what I would teach, because you asked another question about, like, do kids have to have things figured out from the very beginning? And the answer is emphatically no, they don't. But the great thing you have when you're 20 or 22 or 23 is you should have a very low cost of living. And that's what this has taught me too. When I did it, I've been fortunate enough to be in a situation now where, like, I've dialed my cost of living down to its, boniest elements. And that puts me in a position where I can really love the fact that I'm doing what I love and what comes naturally to me and is a collection of everything I've worked on without too much financial stress of, can I pay the bills? And that's the rub. Are you, yes, following what you're good at when you're young, but are you also aware that you do have to pay bills? And what lifestyle level are you comfortable with? Can you live happily at a very low rent, if the answer is yes, then you're going to be in a better position to experiment a lot. I was not in a position to experiment at that age because I started a family very young, which meant a lot of responsibility, which is what drove me into sales to begin with. Like I said, no regrets there. But if I was advising a 20-year-old or someone who's going to college, I would say it's going to have to be a mix of what lifestyle level do you expect, and that comes at a cost. And so what job will you have to make that work while you're trying to figure out your passions and how they could somehow meld together. But in all of this, and here's this, I find this really funny. After I told you to speak slow and say less, I'm having these very long answers, but I think that's the nature of what we're doing.
It is.
What I find is that as long as you're always learning, you're always carrying with you what it is, you're not just existing, you're learning, then you've got tools, you've got skills. And full circle back to what I do, when you invest in communicating, it always pays off. It always pays off. And that's where I'm grateful for all those years. Even if I wasn't making a living as a communications coach or communications consultant, I was always making an investment in trying to be a more effective communicator. And that always paid off. There's always dividends to that.
Yeah. You talk about meetings and like the classic boardroom meeting, or how many meetings are just a complete waste of time in your opinion?
It's like easily half of them. There's not a lot of thought put into it. There's a lot of meetings happen because it's Tuesday at 9:30. We have a meeting Tuesday at 9:30. And Adam Grant, who's an organizational psychologist, has become really popular these days. I follow him on Instagram and I read a lot of his phrase or his quotes and his thoughts. He said that the number of meetings have tripled since 2020. Tripled. And if you think about it, we should have fewer meetings because now we have Zoom and we have all these different vehicles by which we can meet, but we actually are a little bit on autopilot when it comes to having meetings and then the nature of them. He said something that I try to hold on to and teach my clients. He said there's only 4 reasons to meet: to learn, to decide, to bond, or to do. Learn, decide, bond, do. If it doesn't meet one of those 4, cancel the meeting. And because, if you show up to a meeting thinking you're going to do something in the meeting, but then the person who's in charge is like, oh, we're just going to bond today. How was everybody's weekend? You're sitting there going, God, I could be doing so many other things with my time. And you're actually pissed off. Now that's a doubly negative situation. So yeah, there's a lot of meaningless, unnecessary meetings, exceedingly so.
When it comes to if you're going to invest your time into getting great at something, and you may be biased,
You think?
but the importance of communication, where would that rank?
It's exceedingly high. It's so high because Warren Buffett talks about this. Is one of the things that he's been quoted saying, that if anyone is going to invest in themselves beyond just putting money into an IRA or wherever else, invest in public speaking or learning to communicate a little bit better. What I like to tell people is that there are people with malicious intent who are doing a really good job communicating. Everybody who was a dictator in human history were very good communicators. They thrust their ideas upon other people, taking advantage of film, of TV, of radio, of print, whatever. So if you're going to have people with malicious intent out there investing in it, what's your excuse? Like, why don't you just make sure that you're representing yourself so that you have a seat at the table as well? But yeah, it's so immensely important. And we're not talking about public speaking in the traditional sense. Like, you don't have to be someone who stands in front of a group and delivers an oration, but to have 30 seconds in an elevator with the person that you've been meaning to talk to, and to have thought maybe beforehand, like, oh, you know what, I'm going to tell them this. If you have that waiting in your pocket, it's going to put you in better positions professionally all the time. So it always pays off.
Do you find yourself practicing communicating in certain scenarios? Like, let's say you're at the grocery store. Or do you advise people to do that? Where it's like, hey, strike up a conversation, start talking to strangers, just to get in the repetition and be able to be comfortable. Is that something that is taught? I'm just curious, because
I've never advised anyone to do that. Usually by the time someone's made it to me, they're not someone who's uncomfortable talking to strangers.
Okay.
But I will tell you this, though, because I'm glad you brought that up. There are certain types of people who are drawn to certain careers because they don't have to talk to people in those careers. And occasionally those people come through our training, or they come to me, and it's against their will, and it's written all over their face. There's resistance. And what I do, it can be very uncomfortable, because we'll have someone stand in front of a group and say, all right, talk about blank, and I'm going to film you, and we're going to watch you. And it's very scary and nerve-wracking. And most people are willing to be pushed, but there's some people that are like, look, I chose a career specifically for the reason that I wouldn't have to do this, okay? And my answer to that is, your company sees something in you that they want to invest in your future. And communication is a big part of that. If you're communicating to other people just like you, then you probably don't need any help from me. But if you're going to be talking to people who aren't like you, who are above you in the organization or haven't studied what you've studied, you're going to have to find a way to make it meaningful to them. And that's why we're here. So in your scenario, would I advise someone like that to strike up a conversation in the grocery store? Perhaps, just to get some reps and to show that maybe it's not as bad as you think.
There's a reason I asked, actually, specifically, though.
Tell me.
Have you read Never Split the Difference?
That's Chris Voss, correct?
Yeah.
I haven't read the book. I've seen his master classes, but I haven't read the book.
Oh, so he talks about mirroring.
Mm-hmm.
So will you describe what that is for people that don't know?
I don't know if I can do a good job, because there's a mirroring concept from sales. It was kind of like a 1980s salesiness. Like, if someone's sitting like this, then you should also sit like this. Is that the mirroring you're talking about?
Well, there's that but he specifically talks in the book about or saying back to the person what they said to you. Saying
back to the person what they said to me?
Mm-hmm. Just like you just did.
Exactly. I was trying to tease out exactly his. I've seen that. I haven't tried that. That's what I
practice on people in public.
Okay.
So it's just interesting. Because I found that I come across people on a daily basis if I'm out in public And even in podcasting, I have to really get good at being an active listener, which is something I want to talk about. Because it's really easy to be in a conversation and be thinking about what's the next question I'm going to ask. And it's so hard to just like be in it. It's a challenge. It's this push and pull. It's this dance. But the mirroring of what they're saying, to me at least, helps keep things on track, where you can really sit in a topic or a moment.
Yes, and I recall when I heard him explain it, I was fascinated with it too. And when I heard him explain it, it was, you're gathering intel and you're also trying to create conversation, and not, if you're nervous about talking about yourself or if you don't know what to say, instead flip it and just get them talking by repeating the last phrase and then allowing for that uncomfortable silence afterwards, kind of what you and I simulated there, right? And I find it fascinating because it does focus in on the active listening piece, and it gets the focus a little bit off of you, but it's meant to pull out the other person and get more intel out of them. And it was part of like the negotiation technique that he talks about too, right? Because he wants, that's where he's coming from too. And I'm splitting hairs on this because what I teach, it was not quite like negotiation, like sales negotiation. It's a little, that's when you've come to a scenario where you kind of have a clear mind or a clear image in mind of what you're trying to get from it specifically. And so there's a bit more of like a cutthroat, I got to make sure that I stay in control mentality that he brings to the table. That is needed. It's needed. So I don't dip my toe in that too much, but I can definitely see the value, like you're talking about, as a podcaster, where I need to have these questions that really draw them out, and I have to be comfortable like sitting back and even letting for the silence while the answer comes and those kind of things, because it definitely gives you reps on that. Would you agree?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things I found about podcasting in the first probably 10 episodes is how many times I say yeah. Because you're listening to someone talk. And you're going, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Does it drive you crazy? Do you think it's too much?
Oh, yeah. So now I just sit back and I try to listen. And the great podcasters do that. They let people answer, and they don't try to step on their feet by overdoing the yeahs. In fact, I've heard some where I'll listen in the gym or something, and you actually hear the yeah that they had sliced out or cut off, but it still came through the other person's mic, but it's super quiet. But in post, they actually cut the yeahs out.
That's funny.
Just because it's a distraction.
That's funny.
But I think it's different in if we were in person, because the body language and like, I would be showing I'm engaged. But in the format of just listening, it can be distracting. But
what I like about it, you're a
Sorry.
learner. Is that the self-awareness is really good, and you're trying to be the best that you can be. And I'm guessing that you don't say it too much in reality, but it probably drives you a little crazy because you're aware of it now. And so
probably.
You're properly dialing it down, which is good, it's a dance, just like you said earlier. It's part of the dance.
I had a conversation with our mutual friend Andrew when I was in South Carolina this last week celebrating his birthday. And he's our mutual friend, and he flew out from California, and another friend flew out, and we stayed at another friend's house. So me and John and a few other guys have been really good friends for a long time, and I found myself doing all the talking and the asking of questions and trying to facilitate conversation. And I had this epiphany, and I thought to myself, I am talking about myself so much, or I am being the one that is steamrolling. I felt like I was steamrolling conversations. It was a really interesting thing. So I went up to my friend Andrew and I said, hey man, do I talk too much? Like, do I, like, help me understand this? And this is the first time in my life I've experienced this. And he gave me super honest feedback, as a good friend would, which was essentially like, you do talk a lot. However, and that's not necessarily bad, but the things that you talk about, not everybody's going to be interested in. And so I all of a sudden got hyper aware of what I was saying. Like it was like a pendulum. But then that whole trip, I started to focus on being an active listener, to where I would ask a question, and you're great at this. When we get on the phone, you rarely talk. You ask me a question, and then I ramble. And luckily today, the script is flipped. So you keep saying, "Oh, I'm just talking. I'm just."
That's how I feel. I feel like I'm talking too much, but I'm like, well, I guess I am the guest, so this is why you had me on. So okay.
Yeah. But all that to say, I even realized in my marriage, like asking my wife how she feels about something, or asking questions more. And it's so weird, bro, but being this age, I literally have never paused to think about that until, because we talk about active listening, but there's active questioning that's kind of new to me. And I want to know, because you're so good at it, the question asking. How do you do it? How do you get good at asking the right questions?
I'm feeling pressure to answer that question with a question to try to simulate exactly what you're talking about. But I had a friend named Peter, and I have a friend, he's still a friend, and I just noticed this about him one time, where he slowed everything down. We were just having a normal conversation, and I don't remember what it was about, but he just said, "Oh, no way, wait, what was that, like on a Wednesday?" Like he was genuinely curious about something that was kind of mundane, and it made the conversation so rich to me. And I walked away going, first of all, that was interesting. We had an interesting question, because he was asking questions that maybe the average person wouldn't ask. And so it was a more interesting conversation. I felt listened to and seen, and I felt closer to him. It was like, he really gets me, and I thought I really made this was, and it wasn't a professional situation, it was a personal situation, but I've carried that with me because of him. And I even told my friends this, my kids, I've got 3 grown kids. My oldest, Jake, who's 27, he struggled with a fair amount of social anxiety, and he's gregarious, but he's really introverted at heart. But one thing I told him, I said, what will help you in social situations, whether it's like a professional networking event, or it's just like a party and you kind of know one person and the person you know is way over there. I said, just interview people. Just like literally pretend you're a reporter, and don't do it as a scheme or a means to get something. Do it because you're genuinely curious, because curiosity gives birth to so much goodness, to discovery, to connection. Suddenly someone's telling you things, and so I don't know a simple answer to your question, Stephan. I'm like, I remember learning it from a friend, and I remember taking it into public situations, especially with work, because when I was in sales, I would go to a lot of networking meetings, and it was just an annoying, like everyone's there and they got their business cards and someone talks like, okay, and you're putting this pressure, and I always felt like people were selling to me. Okay, there's the guy with insurance, there's the guy with the dental assistant who wants me to come to hire them as a dentist. And I'm like, I don't want to be that. And so what I would do instead was I would look for anyone. I never had any kind of real measurement of who I would talk to, but I'd just look for someone, and I would go, "Hey, my name's John. What's your name?" "Stephan." "What brings you here, Stephan? Why are you here today?" And then you're telling me maybe it was a sales pitch kind of thing. I'm like, "How'd you get into that? Where are you from?" And now the pressure's off. You and I are probably going to learn more about each other. And so when it comes to what you're talking about too, in like if you call me for advice or you just want to talk about the podcast or whatever else, I will say that I'm genuinely curious. I don't want to jump too quickly to the solution. I want to know a little bit more. I really do. Like, why are you feeling that way? And that genuine curiosity allows me to often lead you to the answer anyway, right? Don't you, when you find that, like, you kind of have the answer, And I'm going to tie it back to my dad. That's kind of how he taught music. Like, you already know how to do this. I'll show you some tricks and get you there by asking the right questions. Yeah.
It's, have you ever heard of the 7 layers of why?
No.
It's basically, what is your goal in life? And someone might give the answer like, I want $1 billion. You say, well, why do you want $1 billion? And then it peels back the next layer. Well, I want financial freedom. Whatever that answer may be. Well, why do you want financial freedom? So I can hang out with my family. Well, why do you want to be able to hang out with your family? And then all of a sudden it starts to boil down to this really deep, rich.
Yeah. But you needed 7 of them, right?
Yeah. And it might be, you know what? My parents got divorced when I was little, and we didn't have family, and
There you go.
I thought that if I had money, then I could have what I didn't have.
Yeah.
Or some deep thing. And you said earlier you were coaching someone today, and she felt like she didn't have a seat at the table or deserved to have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And that to me is kind of that same philosophy
Yeah.
a little bit, which is what you get out of asking those questions, which I find interesting just because I'm on that journey so much right now.
Yeah. Well, there's another thing that makes me think about, and it's when I made a career change, when I left Los Angeles and moved to Northern California, and I was getting out of the full-time ministry and I was looking at a sales job. And I had people giving me advice from different places, but I wanted to get advice from someone I really trusted and respected who had no skin in the game. Like, he wasn't trying to get me to stay, didn't want me to go over here. And this guy was Dr. Mike Stephan. He was the head doctor of an emergency room in one of the busiest emergency rooms in Los Angeles. So I really respected him. He's a surfer, cool guy, black belt in, I think it was Hwarang-do, like Korean martial arts, and very subdued, tall, quiet, just Zen-like guy. And I trusted him. And so I said, could I talk to you about this career change I'm making? He's like, sure. What I expected was I was going to tell him, here's what I'm thinking, and then he was going to give me his advice, and because he's wise. But what happened instead was I said, here's what I'm thinking. And he said, why are you thinking of doing that? Well, because this and this and this. Well, and he's just questions, like literally probably 15 minutes of questions. And I finally said, Mike, you're really good at asking questions. You ask really good questions. I don't know how you do this. And these were his exact words. You know what I do for a living, right? I said, yeah, Mike, you're a doctor. He says, no, I ask questions. I diagnose. And I'm like, okay. So back to you, Stephan, and back to this. Questions get to the right answers. Like, Mike's job in the emergency room was to solve the right problem. And if he started solving the wrong problem because he didn't ask the right questions, he's harming that person. They're wasting energy, they're wasting material and resources, and they're probably going to waste the person who's next in line. So kind of like Chris Voss, the hostage negotiator, you have someone who worked in the literal life and death scenario. And what is his first thing? Questions. I want to solve the right thing. So back to coaching. It's like, why do I ask questions? Because I want to diagnose. I want to what's really happening. And boy, I can't believe you got me here. But when I asked my dad's students when he retired, I asked for some feelings about him. And it's like, tell us stories. And one of them said, the one thing I can say about your dad is the word diagnosis. He knows how to diagnose what's really going on. That's why he's such a good teacher. There goes. Back to Bill Augustine.
Bill.
Papa Bill. Papa Aug.
I had the pleasure of being able to be around when you and him were cutting a record together.
That's right. You were around. That's right.
And you were singing and he was playing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you still have that?
I do. We never released it for a lot of reasons. It's still in the can. We've got it mixed. He had a stroke, and I knew that when he had a stroke, he lost a lot of capability on the right side of his body, and he's a pianist, so his right hand was where all the magic is supposed to happen. And piano playing probably saved his life because he was so passionate about learning to play again that you can kind of recover from a stroke to some degree and rewire those neurons in your brain, the synapses. So he was so doggedly determined to learn how to play. And I recognized some years after his stroke, I thought, if we don't record an album with Dad, I might never have a chance. And I had a friend talk about diagnosis. My fraternity brother Antonio was visiting one night for family dinner, and he said, "What's something he went around the table, what's something you should do, and you regret if you don't do it?" And I said, "Record an album with my dad." He's like, "Why don't you do it?" But yeah, I did do it, and that's what you saw. We rented out that space at the church, and he played on the piano, and it was one of the greatest experiences. My daughter got to play bass on a couple of tracks, and he was not his full self physically, and he could barely hear. His foot, he couldn't feel the pedal on the piano, so sometimes he would be on that sustained pedal, and like an entire song was all the notes are melding together. I didn't care, man. It was one of the greatest experiences, and we got evidence of it. Now you got me thinking we got to probably release a couple of singles.
Yeah.
That we should.
That would be really cool. Just the legacy. And I think that the people that he worked with, the students, would enjoy it too.
Yeah, you're right.
And you could even do a thing where you donate proceeds to like a heart association or
it's a great idea.
Or stroke research.
Yeah.
But I feel like I think about that stuff with my dad. I did an interview with him, podcast style, about his life.
Awesome.
Because I was like, one day I want to be able to say, "Hey guys, this is your grandfather."
So good.
He is about to turn 81. You said you're turning 53 tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
Happy birthday.
Thanks, man.
My dad will be 81 on September 10th, so you guys are pretty close.
Okay. I love it.
But yeah, our dad's... What?
So glad you did that.
Yeah, man. Me too. It was the aching thing burning inside of me that I was like, I have to do this. Why am I? And I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And it was like, eventually I was like, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
You mentioned your frat brother, Antonio.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to just talk about your fraternity and how unique it was.
Okay.
So.
I'm game.
So, fire away.
I'm a member of an organization called Phi Beta Sigma, and it is what's colloquially called one of the Divine Nine. There are fraternities and sororities that are traditionally, the National Panhellenic is their delineation. They're traditionally African American fraternities and sororities, and so mostly black fraternity. Phi Beta Sigma I pledged when I was a freshman at UCLA, and as a matter of fact, I had an engagement with Decker last week in San Francisco where there's a young man who is from UCLA, happens to be African American. We got talking about UCLA, and when he was leaving, he was a standout in our training together. He was an exceptional man, and so much so where I was like, do you want to do this kind of work? Because he coaches kids and coaches them in life and stuff. And as he's leaving, I said, hey, did you ever pledge when you were at UCLA? And he goes, yeah, but you probably never heard of it. It's like mostly black fraternity. I said, try me. And then he said, Phi Beta Sigma. I'm like, that's what I am. And so I gave him, we have a secret handshake. I gave him the handshake. We called the grip, gave him the grip. And we're like, oh my gosh, we're brothers. But yeah, I pledged a black fraternity when I was a freshman at UCLA. And it's one of the wildest experiences of my life and one of the greatest things to have ever happened to me to this day. It informs a lot of who I am. And a couple really, really best friends, one of the guys in my wedding, Antonio, who I mentioned. And it informs a lot of how I see race in America, because these young men, had a little white boy show up saying, I want to join your organization. And if you can imagine the history of African Americans in our country and the history of colleges and education and not having access to them is so rife and so filled with tragedy and oppression and bigotry. And there were certain situations where men and women got together and said, we're going to start our own organization. And we're not going to let the bigotry keep us down. We're going to start our own thing. And it's kind of sacred. It is sacred. And I show up like, hey, I want to join. and it speaks so much to their enlightened state, to their progressive state, that they said, yes, we're going to judge you not on the color of your skin, but the content of your character. You're going to have to pledge just like everybody else. And I did. And when, I successfully made it into the fraternity, I was part of, and continue to be part of, a dialogue that I otherwise wouldn't be part of, to be quite frank, because it is a sacred space. And there are conversations happening that I wish, frankly, white America would be a little bit more aware of, because there's still a lot of racism and bigotry and prejudice that it might not be that front porch, like in your face kind of thing, but it's still systemic and going on. And I feel very responsible to carry some of the messages that I learned from these brothers to this day. So yeah.
You have had a significant impact on me in that regard, growing up around predominantly all white people. I think there was 2 black kids in my entire high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I was having this conversation in Chattanooga over the weekend with 2 people that are African American. One she's really, really awesome, but she's not only African American, she's also gay, married to a white woman. And then the other was a guy who kind of grew up in the hood, and he said when we were 14, or his little brother, everyone just had crack and guns, and it just was normal. You didn't even think anything about it. It's just how the hood was.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself engaging in this dialogue, and the whole time it's been through my ability to have this dialogue, and I had a confidence in it, in communicating, not that I knew, but things that you, Jon, Augustine, have opened my eyes to because of your experience with your frat brothers. Like the time you told me that you got pulled over and your frat bro was like, man, I'm so glad you were in the car with me.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we were talking about was one of the guy, his name was Shane, he was so cool. He said, we're thinking about maybe eventually moving to a different country one day, but we have to see if it's friendly to black people, that area.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that is, and then they both were talking about it. And I was just dumbfounded at the fact that I've never had to think that.
Right.
Right. And I'm not political. I'm really not. I think me and you have had some awesome political conversations, and it's communication, and it's what we lack as a country right now is communication.
Oh, yeah.
And I was thinking, man, here I am having this beautiful, rich conversation for over an hour with 2 people that I don't really know that well, and they're opening up their whole lives to me, and I'm just taking it in, and I'm essentially saying, I want to understand what that's like for you,
Mm-hmm.
because I experienced none of that.
Right.
Because I'm a white dude in America.
Right. Yeah.
And so you got to experience that for a long time, being in that fraternity. What would you say coming out of that and really having a better understanding for the history of probably black culture in America, slavery? The guys one of the guy I was talking to, he said when he got arrested one time, the cop, this is in the deep South, but it was calling the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still a sign out there that said N-words aren't welcome. This stuff exists still. Yeah. I see Confederate flags all the time in the South,
mm-hmm.
outside of Nashville, And,
hey man, not far from where you grew up, there's a couple highway exits up the hill. There's plenty of Confederate flags flying up there too. In California.
Yeah. In Hangtown,
mm-hmm.
Placerville, yeah.
Oh,
good old boys. And so this racism thing is actually more real than we realize. And I'm just interested because he said even in Chattanooga, he said there's a lot of racism.
Yeah.
And it's a more developed city that is being gentrified. But I was just like, man, I just didn't know.
Yeah. See, and that's what, I love that you said that right now, Stephen. I just didn't know. Like if white privilege had a subtitle, it would be, I just didn't know. And a lot of folks, maybe even folks who listen to your podcast, hate the term white privilege. And I understand how certain words get commandeered and they take on a whole other meaning. And then people don't, I don't want to say that I've got privilege. But what is white privilege? It's the ability to live in a world where you just don't have to know. You don't have to know that exists. The friends you talk to in Chattanooga, they have no choice but to know. You and I don't need to worry about that. It doesn't affect us. And to answer kind of the question that you're leading me down about the fraternity, and you mentioned the getting pulled over with one of my fraternity brothers, that is a story that embodies the whole difference. And it's this: they are living an entire different experience than we are. They are experiencing things we don't understand. When they hear the national anthem, a lot of folks who come from a society that was set where they're told, you're not part of this. Oh, but you need to stand up and feel good when the song comes on. Like, at an emotional level, they're not experiencing the national anthem like you are and like I am. They're not experiencing getting pulled over. And I'll tell briefly the story. It was like 3 a.m. We're talking Beverly Hills. I'm in a 67 Volkswagen van. I'm driving. My fraternity brother, David, who's black, is in the passenger seat. We're up to no good fraternity shenanigans, harmless, but like we're on a scavenger hunt of sorts, and we're supposed to report back to the brothers with some stuff. We get pulled over, and I was afraid that I was going to get a ticket. I was afraid that my parents are going to find out that I was driving at 3 a.m. for no good reason. I was afraid that maybe I was going to be inconvenienced at most. David was afraid he was going to get pulled out of the car and beaten up because it had happened to people he knew. So whether those cops that night were good or bad doesn't matter. They were fine. They were great. They were polite. They had a good sense of humor. They sent us off on our way. So I'm not judging them. What you can't deny is that me and David had different experiences that night. I experienced it as a white dude. He experienced it as a black guy. What comes with my being white? My experience is I'm not afraid for my life. I'm afraid to be inconvenienced. David's experience is based on conditioning and his upbringing and facts. He's scared for his life. So what I got to see and what I continue to see when I talk to my brothers and their sisters too, we've got a sister sorority, the Zeta Phi Betas, is I am learning about their experience and how different it is than mine. And it's part of what I'm doing too. I'm working on a book actually right now to talk about these things. There are a lot of folks who are starting to wake up to things as white people. And one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of my black brothers and sisters are experiencing is their frustration that we just don't see it. And we want to be allies, guys who look like us, but we also feel a little frozen. Like, am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to do the wrong thing? And quite often we just end up joining in like a rallying cry and saying, like a social media post, but we're not doing the work like you were doing, which is getting in there with individual people and learning their story, and then try to maybe find a way to propel them because they've been held back for so long because of stuff that's in our system. But anyway, yeah, it's just given me a viewpoint into an experience that's different than mine, and it's profound. It's profound. It really is.
Yeah. And it is profound, and again, you've been a big influence on opening my eyes to that. And I feel like I was able to have that conversation because of your impact on me, from the impact that having those relationships had on you.
Thank you.
And it's interesting that it's so easy as white people to be like, this is America. This is the land of the free. You have just as much opportunity to be successful and go out there and get it as anybody else. And there's truth in that. Wow. But the conversation I had this weekend was, it's really hard to get out of the ghetto when all you know is that. And all you know is fast money from selling drugs. And that's what everybody does, and your friends do it, to the point where when he was playing sports in high school, they would go get on the bus, go to another high school to play a game, basketball, and everyone would hide their little baggies of crack on the bus, and then they'd get back on and do it, and it was just the norm. And we were talking about like athletics, like drugs, but like how do you get out of that? Okay, there's athletics, and then there's also like for a lot of people in underserved, underprivileged communities, music and athletics are kind of like the two.
Yeah, entertainment.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just like, that was another eye-opener for me, because I look at it and I'm like, that seems true, and we don't think about it, you know, as white people. And I use the same word as you, white privilege.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because that, again, people are going to be like, well, I don't care what they say, but there is a level of me never having to worry about me getting pulled over because of the color of my skin, what's going to happen to me, or me getting beat up by a cop because of the color of my skin, or all of those tensions.
Or moving to a neighborhood and going, are they okay with white people there?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, where we grew up, wasn't there something in the Eldorado Hills written
1967 in the articles of the CC&Rs, which is covenants, something, and restrictions when you move into a neighborhood and you sign your real estate documents. There's a thing called CC&Rs, and I think it was Article 13. It was written in 1967, and it said, no person of non-Caucasian descent shall take residence in this village. Like, they were broken into villages, and it had all these stipulations, and one of them was like, no person of non-Caucasian descent can visit for more than 2 weeks at a time without the written consent of 2 or 3 neighbors. It was this heinous racist redlining. And I was born in 1971. This was happening 4 years before I was born. Is a document, and in California, so that you don't have to go to Alabama to experience this stuff. And but that's it. It paints a picture, and I got into it. You and I talked about that. I contacted our local municipality. I'm like, yo, what's with this language? Shouldn't you guys have stricken this from the record? And they assured me that they had, but I actually talked to that same fraternity brother I was mentioning that got pulled over, David. He's an attorney in Texas in real estate law. So I talked to him about it. I'm like, can't we strike this from the record? And he said, actually, no. You have to keep the original documents in place. It's a legal document. Then you have amendments that say, okay, we don't believe in that anymore. And they did that, fortunately, but they did that in like 2017. I mean, like, if you bought a house in El Dorado Hills in that village in 2016, you signed a document not knowing that you were agreeing to not let black people live there, or anyone not white. And so that's where like there these parts, when you hear the term systemic racism, and a lot of white folks are like, the system is great. That's what we're talking about. There's parts of the system that exist. And guess what, Stephan? I didn't need to know about that, but when I told this story to my fraternity brothers, to LeBron, to Antonio, to David, they're like, yeah, John, you didn't know that? I'm like, no, I didn't know that. But it's part of their lineage. They know it because they were the ones affected by it. You and I weren't affected by it, so we had the right. We didn't have to know. We didn't have to know. And I'm going to lay this last one on you, dude. Was there something you want to say about that before I change the subject?
No, I was just agreeing with you. We didn't have to know. Yeah. And I think it all comes back to what this whole podcast is about, which is communication. And back to what I said I don't want to cut you off because I want you to finish your thought, but
it'll flow.
In a time where we're in a presidential election, tensions are high, people are talking about, we're going to have a civil war, all this stuff. Like, our country's young. We're like in an awkward junior high phase right now. But what we really need to be doing is this, having conversations like you do with your frat brothers, like I did with my new friends, and Courtney and Shane in Chattanooga over the weekend.
Yeah. Well, in that along the lines, I was talking to Antonio one time, the guys I pledged with, Antonio, And he was asking about, we're going back to 1990, which is when we pledged. And we were getting into, there was the reasons as an 18-year-old I did it, and then there's the reasons as a 50-something-year-old man looking back going, why did I do it? And we were having that conversation. It was interesting. And then what came out of my mouth, I said, I was so embarrassed. I said, yeah, I didn't feel like pledging one of the normal fraternities because, and then I finished that sentence and I said, hold up. I just said normal, didn't I? And he's like, I know you would hear it. He was very patient with me. I'm like, so see, even in the language that I used, I called the white fraternities normal. You hear the difference there?
Mm-hmm.
Normal, white, normal, black, abnormal, different, other. Like even in my language, and I'm a guy who's in it. I'm a guy who's like trying, you know, and I'm still, it's part of how I communicate. I see them, that as they over there, abnormal. I see white as normal. And again, Antonio was like, he was so patient with me. He's like, I'm glad you heard it. I heard it. I'm glad I thank you for recognizing, you know? And so it is a communications thing when you even look at the words we choose and how we identify what things are, it shows where some of these biases are so entrenched that we call something normal that's just different, you know? That's that fraternity. I did want to say this because you're bringing up the political landscape, and I have a nephew who works for an organization called unifyamerica.org, and they exist to try to bring people of different opinions together to have conversations. And there's a framework that he shared with me that I use when I'm in a situation where people are trying to communicate to people that might be contentious disagreement. And it's really fascinating. It's a very, very short version of it is the most interesting and productive conversations are when we talk about our needs and our fears. But what we're doing is we're screaming our positions. And so he draws these, like imagine a mountain peak, here's your position, here's another mountain peak, there's your position. And they're kind of like this, right? In the school district, this is what it would look like. Our position is the school says we want to celebrate Pride Month and we want to have a pride flag. That's our position. There might be some parents, their position is absolutely no, we shouldn't be celebrating this in the schools. This is like real world environment, right? And if you have these two things and like down here, that is values. You say, well, we value our children and them feeling safe. And then the parents like, well, we value our children. And that's about as good as the conversation gets these days. Positions, well, we value this, we value that. It all starts to kind of sound the same. And he said, but here in this little V, right here where they intersect, that's where the needs and fears are. So the more interesting conversation is to say, okay, parents, what is it you need? And they say probably something like, I need to know that you're not indoctrinating my child with one way of viewing everything. I need to know that I am still in charge of my child's moral education. I need to know that you're giving them more than, one viewpoint. Okay, that's valid. I understand those needs. What are you afraid of? Well, I'm afraid of losing complete moral authority over my child and you brainwashing them to be a certain way that I don't want them to be. That's a valid fear. That's a valid fear. Teachers, what are you afraid of? What do you need? I need to know that a kid who is an outcast because they're questioning their sexuality or they feel like they don't understand anyone around them because they feel different, I need to know that I can have a conversation with that kid and make him feel safe. Well, what are you afraid of, teacher? I'm afraid that kid's gonna harm themselves in the school bathroom. That's a valid fear. So I'm sharing all this to say with you right now, it's a communication thing. I wish more of our political conversation was about our needs and our fears. What are you actually afraid of? Like we've had the gun conversation before with some of our friends, and I'm like, are you actually afraid that someone's gonna knock on your door and take your guns away? Like, let's have that talk. Like, what do you need? What do you need? Well, I need to know that as a responsible adult, I can have firearms. That's a fantastic need. Totally makes sense. Like, let's have that conversation. Instead of like, you're an NRA person, you're an that's just, there's no progress there, man. Needs and fears, man. We gotta talk needs and fears.
Needs and fears. I love that, man. That's a great exclamation point to this conversation.
Good.
Because it's simple, man. I like things simple.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think it's almost back to the coaching call you did today, or the 7 layers of why.
Yeah.
you get down to it, instead of everyone pointing middle fingers at each other because they disagree, saying, F you, man. You know, we need to be able to talk, and we all have needs and fears as people. And then we get emotional, and nothing good happens. And I think that most people want the same thing at the end of the day.
What's that?
They want to be loved. They want to give love. They want to have good food. They want to have friends. They want to have community.
Yeah.
They want to enjoy life. They want to have joy. They want to have happiness. They want to have meaning. They want to have purpose. The Japanese have what's called, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but ikigai, which is basically like in their culture what your purpose is. And it's like really a powerful, I guess it's a tradition in Japanese culture, but it is essentially what we're all striving for too.
Yeah.
In American culture or any other culture. So at the end of the day, I think we all want the same things, you know? Like we all want, let's go political. We all want a safe border. Like in terms of, none of us want terrorists in the United States. We all agree that there needs to be a fix for people to immigrate to this country built off of immigrants. How do we do that?
Yeah.
Well, what are your fears? What are your needs?
Yeah. I had this exact conversation with my mother. And as your parents age, as you know, sometimes it can be frustrating because you can start arguing positions and there's something that happens in the aging brain that everything from the past was way better and everything's going to hell now. Like, you know, every generation experiences that. And I was having this talk with my mom and I was like, Mom, what is it you're afraid of? What are you afraid of? And we had a really good talk. And then I said, so what do you need? Well, I need, you know, we filled in the blank there. And then it was a practical conversation about, is that even feasible? Is that realistic to expect what you need to feel safe? But yeah, I think you're exactly right, Stephan. Humans are humans. And it does tie back to even the work I do. It's funny. I go to certain places. I travel a lot for work and I service a lot of different types of clients in different industries. And I will occasionally show up to a place and I'll look at the titles of people that I'm going to coach. And I'll think, what am I going to teach this person? And that fear quickly fades away because they're human and they need the same thing. They want to be heard. They want to be understood. And it's one of the greatest things that I get to do is sit and watch it happen. Find the words, find the manner, find the truth of what they're trying to express. It's immediately and endlessly satisfying. It's so fun.
Well, that's awesome, man. As we wrap up, I have a couple fun questions for you.
Give it to me.
Because you grew up surfing. You helped me surf.
You're one of my best students of all time. A lot of courage. You have a lot of courage.
Thanks, bro.
Uh-huh.
I did catch one wave.
And the conditions were terrible for learning that day, from what I remember. So
yeah, they definitely were terrible, man. The worst they've ever been, I'm sure. And I caught a wave. But here's my question, man. What is the perfect wave?
For me, it's slightly overhead, so it's not too big, but it's bigger than me. It's a left. I'm what's called goofy foot. My left foot is in the back, right foot is in the front. And so I prefer a wave that is breaking. If you're watching the ocean, you're facing the ocean right now, the wave is breaking like this in that direction. So it's front side, I'm facing it. It's glassy conditions, meaning there's an offshore breeze. So the wind is from the shore towards the water. So when the wave breaks, it kind of makes it spray like this with that wind. And it's got a little barrel. You know, it's like breaking like this. It's not mushy. It's breaking like that. So I can ride there. I can get in the barrel. I can do some maneuvers. You know, 6 to 7 foot face, glassy conditions, warm water. I'm going on a surf trip next week. Hopefully it'll look just like this down in San Onofre.
Ooh, yeah, baby.
Yeah, man.
That's awesome. Well, hopefully I see you soon. I'll be coming to Cali. I booked a flight from Sacramento to LAX.
Beautiful.
So hopefully you'll be in town.
Let's do it, man.
And if you're not, I know you'll be making a difference in somebody's life like you've made in mine.
Thank you, man. It means a lot. I honestly, Love talking to you. I love the work you're doing on the podcast. If I'm allowed to say I'm proud of you, I'm proud of you. But more than anything else, I'm just proud to call you brother and friend and colleague. This has been fun.
Well, I appreciate it, man. And I want to acknowledge you and all the hard work you're doing. And I just feel like you've done such a great job. And your kids are a great reflection of, great parenting, I would like to say.
Thank you.
They all rock. I love them. And
They love you.
Real quick, I don't know, can you brag on, just for the music fans out there, brag on Jake a little bit and some of the stuff he's doing?
Yeah, my oldest kid, Jake, and my daughter, Sophia, who's the youngest, they collaborated. They released an album. They're called Gia, J-I-A with an asterisk, which is Jake and Sophia combined. The album is called Yes, No Problem. Oh, Yes, No Question, excuse me. I was just playing it to a colleague last night who was visiting, like blew her mind. The music is so good. But my oldest son, Jake, he studied UCLA. At UCLA, he studied music. And he found that he didn't want to be a performer, even though he was a really good jazz pianist and a singer. He loved engineering, loves producing. And over the last several years, he had an internship at Capitol Records and then at United Recording Studios. And that gave birth to him. He's in a partnership with a good friend whose dad owns the studio, and him and my son and his son work together as studio partners. And they've been churning out some incredible music, not only just their own, but other artists that are coming in. And he got to play a role in a pretty big hip hop hit that came out. He got to be part of the mixing for that. I'm not going to share the details because, but I'm really proud. He's actually, last night, I know I'm meandering a little bit. Last night I visited him and we had a long talk outside about songwriting and lyrics, and I was asking him about certain lyrics of his songs. I'm like, does it mean this? I think it means this. And it was this beautiful conversation about the purpose of art is so that you get to interpret it yourself. He could say, for this song, I really just said these things, but there was no, like, this is what it's about. This is for the people listening. And I found so much satisfaction to see him being an artist like that and explaining how he got to where he wanted to go musically and how he got the sounds he wanted. But it was fascinating to hear his take on his lyrics. It was so much fun to listen to. But
That's cool.
Go check out Gia. They just got to 1 million streams on Apple Music on that album, which was big for them.
Yeah, they got playlisted too.
Yeah, they got some really good playlists. And it was a result of the producing he had done and the engineering he had done with other people. And as you know, it's a relationship business, that he got a good reputation among some of his friends. And so when they released the album, those friends shared the album with certain people who curate playlists. And, that's part of the way you do it these days. So they got on some pretty big playlists, and that exposed them to a lot more folks than they would have been otherwise. And it's directly connected to that hard work he put in leading up to that. So it feels really good as a dad to see that process happen.
Yeah, all the pieces of the puzzle kind of came together there. Yeah, the music, it's kind of one of those, you have to hear it to understand it and to kind of get it. But it's very cool music, and it's kind of one of those, I don't even know I don't like genres, so I'm not going to say what it is and what it isn't, because it's open to interpretation, obviously, as art. But it feels like now's a good time, like what they put out. It feels like the world needed something like that.
Yeah, it's I'm hesitant to categorize it as well. When I've described something wireless, I'm like, it's like Bon Iver and D'Angelo or Maxwell had a baby.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and then you definitely want to listen to that. John, where can people follow you, find you? I
have a pathetically private social media following. I've got an Instagram handle, Augustine. It's AWGUSTEEN, Augustine. My last name is Augustine, but just a private account. I've not done the public, hey, check me out here. I do play music in town on occasion, but I'm not a big promoter of myself along those lines. But if someone wants to follow me on Instagram, I'll get a request and I'll check you out and I'll see. But otherwise, that's it, man.
I'll put a link to your Instagram in the show notes.
And that's a wrap on today's episode with John Augustine. I hope you found our conversation as meaningful, insightful, and inspiring as I did.
Jon shared some incredible wisdom that we can all apply in our professional and personal lives. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us reach more listeners like you. And did you know that the majority of people that listen to this podcast are not subscribed? Don't forget to share this episode with anyone who could benefit from better communication skills. Thanks for tuning in to the Stephan Hogan podcast. And as always, keep striving to be the best version of yourself. Until next time, take care and keep communicating with purpose.